Welcome to a celebration of Nantucket Sound, our monthly webinar series, and thank you for joining us. I'm Audra Parker. I'm the president and CEO of the Alliance to Protect Nantucket Sound. We are a nonprofit environmental organization based in Hyannis on Cape Cod, for those of you who don't know us. And our mission is the permanent protection and preservation of Nantucket Sound, the body of water that lies between Cape Cod and the islands of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. And with this Celebration of Nantucket Sound series, we hope to build awareness of Nantucket Sound, its history, its environment, and its economic importance to the region for our mission to permanently protect this very special body of water. And this is critical because I'm hoping you will see a map shortly. Great. So Nantucket Sound is a very interesting geography with a split between state waters, which run from the shore of Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket out 3 miles. And somehow we've disappeared. So in the light blue, that's state waters. And in the center, the dark blue is federal waters. The state waters are protected under what's called the Massachusetts Ocean Sanctuaries Act, while the federal waters are wide open to development and have no types of protection. So Nantucket Sound, is vulnerable to development, and we are also seeing a number of environmental threats such as habitat degradation, diminished water quality, coastal erosion, and such. So we are, the Alliance, along with a very strong and diverse group of stakeholders, are working to enact a federal bill, federal legislation called the Nantucket Sound National Historic Landmark Act. And this legislation, once passed, would do 3 very important things. First of all, it would recognize Nantucket Sound's rich maritime and tribal history by designating it as a National Historic Landmark. And just to give you an example of other National Historic Landmarks in the area, the entire island of Nantucket has that designation, as does Wesleyan Grove on Oak Bluffs and the Kennedy Compound in Hyannisport. So in addition to the designation, I see our speaker has joined us. In addition to our designation of the Sound as a National Historic Landmark, this bill would also ensure that the protections that exist under state law that today only apply to the waters 3 miles from shore would also apply to the federal waters in the center of Nantucket Sound. And the bill would also provide very significant environmental benefits to address threats to water quality, habitat degradation, coastal erosion, and other issues facing the Sound and the Cape and Islands. So the bill so far has had very wide and enthusiastic support from the towns along Nantucket Sound on the Cape and Islands, tribal governments, environmental organizations, chambers of commerce, historic preservation groups, and many, many others. So that is what we are focused on enacting this federal legislation, and just wanted to give you a little overview of our work before I introduce our speaker tonight. So our speaker tonight is Karen Dourdeville. She is the Sea Turtle Stranding Coordinator for Mass Audubon's Wellfleet Bay Wildlife Sanctuary. Her work began at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute on projects including marine mammal underwater acoustics, tracking, and aerial identification of individual whales. And today, Karen will talk about the 4 species of sea turtles that feed in our waters, and she'll explore different aspects of Wellfleet Bay's sea turtle work, including sea turtle rescue and conservation research. So I welcome Karen, and hopefully she'll turn her video on, and appreciate you joining us tonight. The video capacity is off, so for the audience, you'll only see me and Karen, but you can use the Q&A function throughout for questions. And at the end, after Karen gives her interesting and informative presentation on sea turtles, I'll rejoin and facilitate a Q&A with questions that we're getting from the audience. So welcome, Karen, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. Let me just share my screen here and get started.
Great, and I will get off. So and I will be back in a bit to join you.
Okay, can you all see my introduction screen and hear me okay?
Yes, I can, since I'm the only one that can respond.
Then I
Yes,
guess you
it looks
can.
perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, good evening, and thank you so much for inviting me to talk to your group and to speak about sea turtles, which I love to do. And I like to talk too about the sea turtle work that Mass Audubon Wellfleet Bay does year-round with sea turtles in protecting, rescuing, studying, and documenting sea turtles in our local waters. Now I'm going to break down the talk into several categories, starting with explaining the 2 sea turtle seasons that occur in our local waters, but then especially relating to sea turtles in Nantucket Sound. Nantucket Sound plays an important role for sea turtles, and I'm going to talk about it as a feeding ground, which is very important in that regard, and also in terms of the fatality caused by vessel strike. And that is a big concern in Nantucket Sound. But first, we're going to just give a little tiny bit about natural history of sea turtles. There are 7 species of sea turtles in the world, and 4 of those feed in waters off Massachusetts in the late spring, now, summer, and early fall. And those 4 species are Kemp's Ridley. The Kemp's Ridley is the smallest sea turtle species in the world. It's also the most endangered. It's listed federally as critically endangered. The Ridleys we have in our waters are juveniles. Most of them are about dinner plate size. These are little ones. It varies a bit, but little Kemp's Ridleys feeding in our waters. We have loggerheads. Most of the ones in our waters are subadult. It's a bigger species, but also they're older than the Ridleys in our waters generally. And so these are roughly 18 inches to 2, sometimes 2.5 feet. We sometimes have juveniles. We sometimes find mature adults, but most of them are subadults. And we have green sea turtles. Greens are the largest of the so-called hard shell species, which is 6 of the 7 species. But again, the ones in our waters are juveniles, many about the same size as the little Ridleys or slightly larger. And then the leatherback. And I say this with a smile because I have a very fond spot for the leatherbacks. They're the gentle giants of the sea turtles. These can be 6, 8 feet long. If some of you have seen them in our waters, you're lucky. They are just magnificent creatures, which we will talk more about and sort of focus on them in Nantucket Sound as well as on loggerheads. So just a quick look back evolutionarily. This goes back to about 110 million years. Modern sea turtles are ancient species and haven't changed really for that 110 million years. So pre-dinosaur. The top 6 species on the right are the so-called hard shell, 3 of which I mentioned we have, the loggerhead, Kemp's Ridley, and green. And then the leatherback at the bottom diverged very early, back 190 million years or so from the hard shell species. It's got some very different physical characteristics and adaptations, which are a whole field and talk on their own. You can read about them, but they're fascinating. So I said I was going to break it down into 2 seasons, our work. The first season is the feeding seasons. Sea turtles don't nest up here. They can't spend the year up here. It gets too cold, but they come this time or through the summer and to our nutrient-rich waters to feed. So again, it's those 4 species, the leatherback, the loggerhead, Kemp's Ridley, and green. And then Wellfleet Bay has 2 different projects really that relate to this summer feeding season. Our live sightings and our boater outreach. and then our summer stranding response. And then I will talk not too long about our cold stun season, which is late fall, early winter. And even though most of the cold stunning, which I'll explain, doesn't happen in Nantucket Sound per se, Nantucket Sound still plays an important role with our cold stuns. Most of the cold stunning occurs north of the Cape in Cape Cod Bay, and it's only Kemp's Ridley, loggerheads, and greens. We have a big rescue operation, and then on the cold stuns that are deceased, we conduct necropsies or animal autopsies, and that's where a lot of the science happens on these cold stun turtles. So as you saw before in maps, we're going to be talking in large part about Nantucket Sound down here. And I'm just going to show you a few pictures of those 4 species in our waters. This is a young green. And they're not green on the outside. They derive that name from their fat inside. Green turtles, as they mature, become totally herbivorous, so plant eaters. They're eating algae and seagrasses. As they get a little older, the juveniles are omnivorous. They're eating everything. But older green turtles eat plants. So they get chlorophyll, which settles in their fat. And that fat is green, so that's where the name comes from. And here's a green turtle, older. And then here's one of our little Kemp's Ridleys. And again, the dinner plate size, juvenile, the most endangered sea turtle in the world. Here's a nice shot of one of those little Ridleys showing that characteristic beak on the upper jaw, that sort of overbite. It's very characteristic of the Ridleys. And this, I love this series of pictures. This is a blue shark. You can see here's a blue shark swimming around this little Ridley. And sharks do eat small turtles. Probably blue sharks don't. But this one was checking this Ridley out. It swam by it and then it swam away. And then on the right, you see a nice picture of that little Ridley. And then our loggerheads. Now, subadults, these are bigger. They're basically brown, but they have a lot of beautiful kind of yellow and orangey tints, especially on their skin, on the flippers and around the head and neck. Loggerheads also, you can see on this one, so the head is down here, and here's the aft end of it, and you can see 3 gooseneck barnacles on this one. Loggerheads accumulate a lot of what we call epibionts, so other organisms that live on the outside. And loggerheads can be covered with epibionts, both algae and all different animals. So they can form sort of their own little ecosystem, carrying around all these animals on them. Sometimes in the water, they're the color of kind of a wet paper bag. They can look a little more orangey than that. Unfortunately, a subadult loggerhead in the water can look a lot like one of those small patches of brown seaweed that if any of you are out on the water boating, you see pretty frequently. They can look a lot like that, which is not good for the loggerheads. Here's another beautiful loggerhead shot. And here's one swimming down, so here's the head. And here you see some of that algae I was talking about growing on the carapace, or the upper shell. I'll use the word carapace some, that's the upper shell. And then our giants, our leatherback. So this is one swimming away from us. This is its head up, taking a breath. And then this is just the forward part of its carapace. And you'll see these ridges are very characteristic. There, you can see it more in this picture. They have these ridges that run fore and aft. So this turtle could be 6, 8 feet long. This spot right on the top of its head often gets reported to us as a wound because it can turn quite pink. In fact, it's nicknamed pink spot, or it's called a pineal spot. It's actually an area of unpigmented skin that sits over the pineal gland next to the brain. And there is research now showing that the light coming through that unpigmented skin hitting the pineal gland is one of the triggers that tells this turtle the days are getting shorter if it's north and needs to start south, or longer if it's south and wants to be heading north. And the leatherbacks eat gelatinous organisms. That's kind of a mouthful, but they eat true jellyfish and also other creatures that are like jellyfish. So in our waters, these are 4 species that they eat. And this one in the upper left, the lion's mane, is one of their very favorites. And any of you, again, that are out on the water are probably familiar with these. These are the jellies that they're in our waters. They're usually about a foot diameter. They're sort of anywhere from kind of orange to purplish, and you see them washed up on the beaches sometimes. They're a cold water jelly. And as you go farther north, like up off eastern Canada, they can grow to 2-3 foot diameter. And leatherbacks have adaptations that allow them to swim in colder water than the hardshell species. And so they go up off eastern, some of them go up off eastern Canada, and they're feeding on these big lion's mane. However, 2 years ago, we had an influx of big lion's mane in our waters. We're not sure why. The water wasn't cold, but we had 2-3 foot diameter lion's mane. So this is a leatherback swimming right at you as you're looking at it. These black spots are the nares or nostrils, and that leatherback has opened its mouth. It doesn't have teeth, but it's got sharp cutting edges on its jaws, and chomp down through the middle of that lion's mane jelly, and it'll take a big chunk of it. And then here is one that has raised its head. Again, look how prehistorically beautiful I think that leatherback is. And this is lion's mane jelly streaming out of both sides of its mouth. And here's this is a shot underwater by a diver, Tom Burns, in our waters. And here's some lion's mane streaming out of the sides of that leatherback's mouth. So the first division I'm going to talk about under this feeding season is our live sightings effort and boater outreach. So we try to solicit sightings of sea turtles from boaters. We started this project about 20 years ago, and we advertise and we put signs up, and I'll talk a little more about that. We're trying to get boaters to watch for and report sea turtles. This was taken off a little center console. That's a leatherback right alongside a center console. And this is the homepage of our website for that sighting hotline. So you can either call in sightings or report online, and it lists here the information we're asking boaters to give us. And really the goals of this website, seaturtlesightings.org, are 2. You can read them there, but we're documenting occurrence. So where and when sea turtles are seen in our waters. And then secondly, and really as importantly, we're trying to alert and educate boaters that sea turtles are out there. On the website, we provide photos and videos of what the turtles might look like ahead of the boat. You know, boaters can develop a search image of what to look for. And the idea here is that we're trying to decrease vessel strikes. We're trying to say, sea turtles are out there. If you watch ahead of your boat, you could avoid hitting one. And you could also make your day better by seeing one and avoiding it. So on the left is the online reporting form if you report a sighting. And we don't just log these into our database as they come in, we vet them. So we contact that reporting party, ask very specific questions to try to make sure we're getting the right species identification. So the ones we put into our database and on our website maps, we feel are credible sightings. And then on the right is a flyer that you may have seen at marinas or harbor masters' offices or yacht clubs. And this is aimed again at getting boaters to report sea turtles. And whenever I talk to people on the Cape, I say, if you would help us distribute these to community bulletin boards, anything, any place you think boaters might see them, we'd appreciate it. So I'm saying that to you. If there's a place I could deliver or mail some flyers that some of you might distribute for us, we'd love it. And this is just one of an example of the sightings maps on the website. So this is last year, 2021. And obviously this is a bigger area. Here's Nantucket Sound down here. The red marks are leatherback, the blue are loggerhead. And these sightings are what we call opportunistic, meaning they're not collected systematically. There was no survey. These are just where boaters are and seeing turtles. So they're skewed toward where boaters are. And we can't correct for effort, but they are very useful, especially over time, in showing trends. Now you might notice that Nantucket Sound looks sort of empty down here. And last year that was true to some extent of sightings out there. And we think there's a reason for that. And it's actually been the case for a couple of years. Let me go back. Well, that's the 2021 again. Here's a cluster. We always get sightings out along these east-west shoals. That's Lomidou, and there are 3 shoals right here. Of course, you know, this area is the ferry triangle is here to here to here to here. So ferries are going and lots of recreational boats. And then this was 2020 again. Nantucket Sound was very light, although I must point out up here, the loggerheads are routinely seen all summer and into the fall right up along this area. And that, I'm going to go back to 2021. This summer, look, all these blue are loggerhead sightings right up along this coast. So the south side of the Cape, so this is Centerville, here's Lewis Bay, Centerville, Barnstable, right, that whole coast. Loggerheads are there routinely over and over and over. But then when we skip back to 2018, there were many more sightings in Nantucket Sound. And this is actually more typical of the years prior to the last 2 also. Now, one of the things that happened in the last 2 years is we know there were a lot of leatherbacks southeast of Nantucket. So when you think about a 6 to 8 foot long, maybe 1,000-pound turtle eating jellyfish, which is 95% water, it's got to eat a lot of jellyfish. It's got to go where the density is really great, and it's just got to feed all the time, which tagging data from our colleague Cara Dodge at New England Aquarium has shown that leatherbacks in our waters are feeding up to 23 hours a day. They're feeding day and night. They just have to keep basically a conveyor belt of jellies going through their system. They're trying to pack on fat for the reproductive season, and to eat something as non-nutritious as jellyfish, they have to eat so many. So we think that the concentration of jellies has been greater the last couple of years southeast of Nantucket. And this is a photo by Cara Dodge. She had a critter cam on a suction cup on this leatherback. So you're on the carapace of this leatherback. Here's its head up, there's its pink spot, and here are 2 ferries. So so this is in Nantucket Sound. Now we also get live sightings of the little turtles, although not that many. I mean, they are little. This was Nantucket Sound. This was south of South Cape Beach, and this was a guy on a paddleboard, and this is a little Kemp's Ridley. And again, these little turtles we vet very carefully and can't really count any sightings as credible unless we get photos or very detailed descriptions, but we do see them. We know they're there. And this is a loggerhead, again, showing a huge amount of algae growing on the carapace. And now I'm going to show you a video of a loggerhead. And what I want you to think about with this is how this demonstrates how vulnerable these turtles can be to a vessel strike. So you maybe heard the boater saying it doesn't look like he's doing too well. Well, he probably was doing fine, but sea turtles bask at the surface and their lungs are right up at the top of the carapace here. And so basking at the surface on a sunny day, that sun is warming the air in its lungs. So it's warming. It's a warming mechanism. It's also restful. And you probably didn't notice, but during that whole little video clip, the turtle never raised its head to exhale. The boat, and luckily this boat was slow and careful, but it probably kind of startled the turtle that was resting and it began to try to swim, but it never exhaled, so it couldn't dive. But think how easy it would be if the boater weren't watching or were going fast to hit that turtle. And now I've got two videos of leatherbacks to show you. I'll play one. And there it dove. So it raised its head to breathe several times and then dove. And this is another video. This was in Nantucket Sound. This was northeast of Chappaquiddick. And again, think how hard it is to see these. And these are flat days, but especially with glare, and they sometimes are resting just at the surface. The head came up. That's you see the ridges there. So as these turtles are up here feeding, unfortunately, they are getting hit by vessels and they are getting killed by two other things that I'll mention. But the Mass Audubon Wellfleet Bay Sea Turtle staff are the federally mandated responders to all sea turtle strandings in southeastern Mass. So that's from the Rhode Island border through the South Coast, the islands, all the Cape up toward Boston. So we'll talk about that summer stranding response. And occasionally we get a live stranding. And this was one several years ago in Cape Cod Bay, but it gives you an idea of the size of a leatherback, how many people it took to lift it. And this was a successful rescue. It was put back in the water and swam away. And this was just last fall, again in Cape Cod Bay, live leatherback stranded at the mouth of Herring River. And it took us and two of our colleague organizations, the International Fund for Animal Welfare and New England Aquarium, to both move the turtle to a place it could be released and also do a health assessment and put a couple tags on it, but it was successfully released and tracked. So these are great success stories and happy events. And that was a live Kemp's Ridley last fall that just got caught by the tide. But this doesn't happen very often. Vessel strikes, sadly, are the much more common stranding that we respond to. And these occur in Nantucket Sound with regularity. So what you're seeing here is a leatherback. It heads to the left. And here you're seeing two, and these are fatal strikes from propellers. Now these next photos I'm going to show you aren't pretty, but they're important to know about. This was a mature female leatherback in Falmouth. So again, Nantucket Sound. This was east of Falmouth Harbor. And you see those propeller marks moving right up the carapace. Killed this mature female. You know, any of them being vessel struck are sad, but the mature females are the saddest because you're taking a vitally important reproductive animal out of the population. This was one on the north shore of Nantucket that was more decomposed, but again, you see these parallel propeller marks, right, going up the carapace. And this one we were able to do a full beach necropsy on. And again, this was north side of Nantucket Sound. Again, those parallel propeller marks. It's very tricky to ascribe size and type of propeller to wound, but this type of presentation is certainly indicative of a fast, smaller propeller. This was a vessel-struck leatherback on Vineyard Sound, but West Chalk, and it had flipper tag. And so by asking the tag repository in Florida, we were able to learn that this mature female had nested in eastern Panama. So these four arrows show where we have responded to vessel-struck female leatherbacks in our waters. And this shows where, in these three cases, where they nested. Here it was actually two turtles we've had from eastern Panama. This is Trinidad, which is one of the major nesting grounds of leatherbacks in the Northwest Atlantic. And this was the little island of Anguilla. And then there was a female here that was rescued out of the intake channel of the St. Lucie power plant in Florida. So all four, well, there were five of these nested or were rescued, but came up to our waters and were killed by vessels. Loggerheads get hit too, as you could have seen in that video. And again, I apologize, these are so gruesome, but this is one of the things we do focus on. So one of the things we try to do is as much outreach as our resources allow and our energy to do outreach to boaters. So we have partnered for the last 4 years with the Martha's Vineyard Striped Bass and Bluefish Derby. So this black line shows their boundaries of their derby fishing, and their derby runs mid-September to mid-October. Now that's prime leatherback, and loggerheads are still here too, but prime leatherback occurrence in our waters. So they give us a greatly reduced ad in their brochure. We've given talks, we hand out flyers and key tags. So a lot of their boaters have learned a lot about sea turtles, and they've become good reporters for us. And there are 3,500 people registered in that derby. And you know, we know that boater outreach can work because we hear this kind of sentence fairly frequently. Basically, I would have hit it if I hadn't been looking straight ahead. And we also try to persuade boaters not to use autopilot, because obviously autopilots do not see sea turtles. So a second cause of fatality in our waters, this occurs more in Cape Cod Bay than Nantucket Sound, but it is in Nantucket Sound too. There are just more lobster fishery. There's more lobster fishery in Cape Cod Bay. But entanglement in fixed vertical line fishing gear. So on the left, this is sort of a typical lobster pot arrangement. It might be only one trap. At the bottom, it might be a string of traps, but they have a vertical line up to a float. But here on the right, this is an entangled leatherback in lobster floats. And this one was successfully disentangled. The head is out, you know, these have to breathe. So this head was out, it got reported quickly. The disentanglers got to it and it was released successfully. And the Center for Coastal Studies in Provincetown are the designated disentanglers, as you may know, for both marine mammals and sea turtles. And they are expert at this dangerous, very physically demanding job. So down in the bottom here, you see a leatherback head. There's its eye. Here's the front part of its, there's a nair, and here's its upper jaw, and they're working to disentangle that turtle from this lobster gear, or it could be whelk gear too, conch whelk gear. It's another Center for Coastal Studies disentanglement here, and the Coast Guard watching out here. Now I'm going to show you another video. This was from a diver off Martinique in the Caribbean, but it shows you how a leatherback can become entangled so easily in vertical line. There's the leatherback swimming in from the right. It's so graceful in the water. Those long flippers. They're really long migrators. They're magnificent swimmers. You're going to see the line faintly. There it is. There's the line. It swims. It probably just didn't even see it. Swam right into it with it and caught it with its right shoulder. Speeds up, trying to get away. They don't have a reverse. So it turns. So it started a wrap. It's got half a wrap now. Still trying to get away, but it's not working. So it turns again. Now it's got the first full wrap. This one ended happily. The diver actually cut the line, but they don't always. This was another not pretty picture, but a leatherback that had been entangled. You can see all this necrotic tissue in the right front flipper, and this was in Cape Cod Bay last fall. The orange paint and the tag are our marks to identify that should it refloat and move, which this turtle did. And here, of course, both of these are dead. All these are dead. This one was just north of Muskeget Channel in Nantucket Sound. They have to breathe air. The wrapping can just strangle them, or they can not be able to get up to breathe. And then the third hazard to leatherbacks in our waters, besides vessel strike and entangling gear, is plastic ingestion. And we know less about this. We know it can be a real problem for leatherbacks, both the big plastics that you see and also microplastics, but there's a lot of work being done on microplastics, but that's in kind of early stages. But leatherbacks are visual feeders. So this next slide is sort of self-explanatory. I'll just let you look at it. You can see why it would be confusing and hazardous to a leatherback wanting to eat a jellyfish. So now I'm going to talk not very long about our cold stun effort. As I said, it's mostly in Cape Cod Bay, but it's a big project for Mass Audubon Wellfleet Bay. We have over 200 volunteers. We hire additional seasonal staff. Cold stunning happens late October through early January. And it's what it means, hypothermia. It's these species are up here feeding, and many of them are north of the Cape and up into the Gulf of Maine. And then as the fall comes, days are shortening, water's cooling, they begin heading south. Well, a lot of them, we don't know what percentage, get actually physically trapped by Cape Cod itself, get down in this bay. It's a hook. And they are feeding still in here, and the water's cooling slightly, but they're down in here. But as the water gets below about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, they become a little compromised in mobility. And then as it lowers more, they're more and more compromised. They can't get out of the bay. Some are being blown in if there are strong easterlies or northeasterlies. So we know at Wellfleet Bay that when the water gets down to about 50 Fahrenheit or a little above that, we send our trained volunteers to very specific beaches based on winds, the duration, the strength, and the direction. And so we know where turtles are probably going to be washing in, and most are still alive, especially early. And our volunteers begin finding them, and then there's a whole trained protocol of how to handle them, how temperature protocols for transporting them, which are vitally important. And we rescue many turtles. These signs get posted around Cape Cod Bay. None of these turtles would survive without this rescue effort. The water's too cold, they're too compromised, they would not get out of the bay and be able to swim south. And so here are our numbers on the right. You can see this was our 4th biggest year ever. The numbers are going up. You know, like a lot of species, especially with climate change, they're coming farther north to feed, but there also are some successes in this story too, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So this was a real early cold stun Ridley. It still had enough motion to crawl on the sand a little bit, but it could not have swum out of the bay. And we rescue these juvenile greens and the subadult loggerheads, and it's day and night because most of the strandings occur at high tide. And as probably most of you know, high tide varies about an hour each day. And so many of our tides, and especially in the winter, the days are so short. A lot of days we have 2 dark high tides, but at least 1. So our volunteers are out there 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, patrolling. Here's a loggerhead rescue at night. And on the left, on the big Eastham and Brewster tidal flats, he's hauling a loggerhead on a sled. And on the right is one of our volunteers rescuing a Ridley at night. And some of the loggerheads are too big to pull in a sled or carry, so we have carts. And this is a loggerhead that arrived at our sanctuary. At our sanctuary in Wellfleet Bay, we process them. These are all live turtles in the upper left and right, all Ridleys. And each one gets its own banana box. And we are measuring, weighing, stabilizing their temperature, checking for tags, checking for any wounds or anything physically out of the ordinary with them, and getting them ready to be transported to 2 rehab facilities. So these are loggerheads ready to go to either New England Aquarium in Quincy, their animal care center, which their veterinary and rescue staff does just fabulous work in rehabilitating these cold stuns, or to the National Marine Life Center in Buzzards Bay, which takes a much smaller number of turtles, but is very important in our operation too. And then we have volunteer pilots through an organization called Turtles Fly 2, because the aquarium can't take all the turtles. And so they get full, and NOAA works with Turtles Fly 2 for these private pilots to fly these cold stuns down to facilities all along the East Coast and in the Gulf of Mexico. These red dots show where turtles in 2020 were taken. So our cold stuns from Massachusetts were taken to all these facilities to continue rehab and be released. And that's the goal, to release them back into the wild. So these releases happen down south, but Nantucket Sound is important for our cold stun releases because turtles that are still at the aquarium, at New England Aquarium, get released in the summer right into Nantucket Sound at the West Dennis Beach, which is right in here. So this summer they're going to be releasing 27 turtles, maybe 29, but 27 at least, greens, ridleys, and loggerheads. So they get released right into this great feeding area for loggerheads, and hopefully they all stay out of Cape Cod Bay. And these were photos from last summer's releases. This loggerhead has a satellite tag on it. And these are two of our volunteers. We get to take part in these releases with New England Aquarium, which is just the happiest event. And then these at the bottom are all ridleys. Two more ridleys released last summer. Another loggerhead released last summer into Nantucket Sound, because it's prime feeding area for these turtles. And this is a little video from one of our volunteers of the release last summer. Those releases are incredibly happy events for all of us. But not all cold stuns survive. And so the last section here I'm going to mention are the necropsies we do on the ones that don't survive. And as I said it early, this is where a lot of science occurs. These unfortunately were all deceased ridleys from a couple of years ago, which we freeze and then conduct necropsies in the winter or spring at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And I won't mention all of these, but these are just some of the sea turtle conservation research projects that take samples from our dead turtles. And these are projects that would not be able to get these samples, especially of the Kemp's ridley, the juvenile Kemp's ridleys, anywhere else in the world. And so a lot of these scientists actually come to our necropsies and take the samples themselves. Some we collect for different scientists and send them. But it just is a very, very vital way to keep some sea turtle conservation science going that would not be available other ways. And these are some of our staff and volunteers and some of those scientists taking samples at just this spring at Woods Hole. And again, I won't belabor this, but one study which our necropsies have contributed to is aging. It's very hard to age. I mean, you get a range by size, but it's not very precise. So there are a number of scientists that we work with who have, from these dead turtles, have taken the humerus, this upper arm bone, like we have a humerus too, and they section it and then dye it and use stable isotope analysis to determine where that turtle was feeding each year. Each of these rings is a year, like a tree growth ring. And this one shows that up until about year 11, that loggerhead was feeding oceanically, so offshore. They are big migrators too around the North Atlantic. And then at year 12, it came into the coast. And for population studies, this kind of information is really important. And, you know, a lot of the goal of all of this conservation work is really this, to send turtles back to the wild, to keep them from being killed so they can reproduce and make more babies. These are hatchling Kemp's ridleys at Rancho Nuevo in eastern Mexico, where most of them hatch, and they've just hatched and they're heading for the surf. So please, if you are boaters or you know boaters, spread the word to watch for sea turtles or other marine life ahead of a boat. It's going to make a better day for you if you see interesting things, and it could just save a sea turtle's life. Important Nantucket Sound feeding. We'll see what the numbers look like this year, but we know a lot of turtles feed in Nantucket Sound and pass through Nantucket Sound, and they'll be out there this year too. And thank you very much. And now I think we have time for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. That was great. I didn't, some of those pictures were hard to, disturbing, but good to know, good to see that. So we have a number of questions from the audience. All right, Ken asks, are these different species than those that are so prolific in Hawaii?
Well, there are only 7 species in the world. So some of our, there are a lot of greens in Hawaii. There are hawksbills, which we don't have up here, but there are hawksbills in Hawaii. There are leatherbacks in Hawaii too. A green is the same species in the Atlantic. There used to be some thought that there was a subspecies in the Pacific and they called it the black turtle, but it really is just kind of a variant of the green turtle. And that's one of the main turtles in Hawaii.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Ruth is asking, what type of fish broke during the viewing of the leatherback turtle?
I think that was a bonito, but I don't know, some of you fishermen might know better.
And do the turtles eat fish or just jellyfish?
Well, not the leatherbacks. Loggerheads do when they can get them. Loggerheads are omnivores. They'll eat, primarily they're bottom feeders and they're eating mollusks and crabs, but they'll eat fish if they can get them. But the leatherback is not going to chase a fish.
Okay. Ken asked, do all of these turtles lay eggs in beach nests?
Yes. In the tropics and subtropics. Not up here.
Sandy says, great presentation. And Joanne is asking, actually 2 people are asking about the dates when they will be released at West Dennis Beach, because they would love to watch the release. And can you give more information?
We never know until right before. And that's because the veterinarians have to clear those turtles for release. And so, because the ones they keep generally are the hardest cases. A little exception to that because they're also permitted to do a tagging study, so they've kept some for tagging. So we never know until maybe the day or so before, but we could let people know. We ask that that nobody put it on social media because they try to keep the crowds down. So we try to keep it to our volunteers, although your members would be welcome to attend. And so if you want, I could let you, Audra, know if you wanted to, but we would ask you not to put it on social media.
Okay. No,
before. Afterwards, you could put photos and videos on social media, but not before, because it's just too much crowd control issue.
Yep. No, I totally understand that. Terry is saying, thank you for a great presentation. Donita is asking about if you could speak a little bit about predators.
Predators on the turtles?
Yes, that's my
when they're small, sharks eat a lot of turtles. We know that. As they get bigger, not really, and it's really humans that are the, at times predators. Sea turtles in other parts of sea turtles are global, and so there are parts of the world where they are still eaten. Many places they're protected. The eggs are eaten. Again, many places they're protected, not every place. So eggs and turtles are still eaten in certain parts of the world, and it's often in very poor, where people are very poor. But sharks are really probably the biggest predator for young turtles. tiny turtles, the hatchlings, everything eats them. I mean, fish, even before they hit the surf. That last picture I showed of the hatchlings, a lot of times on nesting beaches, there'll be crabs, there'll be seagulls, dogs. In eastern Mexico, dogs will go out and just chomp down on them. So there are lots of predators on the nesting beach for hatchlings. But once they get in the water, fish, and then as they get a little bigger, big fish like sharks.
How big were those hatchlings?
Oh, just probably 2 inches long.
Okay. Ruth is asking if you could give an estimate of the turtle population.
Well, that's a good question. It really varies by not only species, but population. And population being a breeding, so genetically related group. So the reason that Kemp's Ridleys are critically endangered is that they're considered one genetic population. 90% of them are born in that eastern 31-mile stretch of beach on eastern Mexico. Their estimates now, numbers are 7,000 to 9,000 breeding females, so laying females. It's really hard to come up with number of males. Most of the population estimates are based on nesting. So that's down. I mean, the Ridleys were coming back pretty well until 2010. They had been decimated in mid-20th century, and then they were coming back a lot till 2010. Deepwater Horizon hit, and their numbers plummeted. Now they're coming back again, but not as quickly. So it really, numbers vary with species and with population. So leatherbacks, we are part of what's called the Northwest Atlantic population of leatherbacks, and estimates for them are 10,000 to 15,000 nesting females. So again, that's not necessarily males, but it varies all around the world with population. So I'm sorry to not give a very good answer.
No, it gives a sense, though. It's in the tens of thousands if there are thousands. Okay, gives an order of magnitude. How many hatchlings are the breeding females?
Well, a nest is roughly 100 eggs, and then it varies a bit with species, but that's kind of true for most of the species.
Okay.
And in most species, a female will lay more than one nest per season, but not nest every year. It's too energetically expensive.
Okay.
So they might only nest every 3 years.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay. Elizabeth would like to know where the turtles migrate between.
Well, the leatherbacks our Northwest Atlantic leatherbacks are going south, some into the Caribbean. There's a small nesting number all around the ring of the Caribbean, but then there are the 2 big nesting beaches I talked about on Trinidad and French Guiana in Northeast South America. So they're going Caribbean and Northeast South America. Ridleys are trying to go back into the Gulf of Mexico. We don't think the ones in the Atlantic necessarily get there. So loggerheads have a big nesting population in eastern Florida and western Florida too, but more eastern Florida. So they eventually will go back down there to breed.
Okay.
So and again, it varies all around the world.
Elizabeth wants to know if all of the cold stunned turtles stay in captivity for the winter.
No. In fact, some get released very quickly. Some of the early ones are in good shape, so they don't get released up here. The water's too cold. But some of the very early ones, as numbers are going up, the pilots are flying them south, and if the water temperatures are right, they're getting released right away off Florida or within days. And then it's really a case of veterinarians checking. Most of the cold stuns are have pneumonia. Many of them, because they've been floating around for a while, not eating, getting colder, not swimming. So they have a number of different blood imbalances. So as they get healthy enough to be released, they're released down south. Up here, not until late June at the earliest.
Okay. Kathy says, very informative, thank you. And Anna says, thank you, Karen, great talk. I run a stranding network. Wait, I just lost her, hold on. Okay, I run a stranding network in the south of Portugal. We don't have nesting beaches, but we are a hot spot as foraging ground, mostly for loggerheads and leatherbacks. Most of the turtles strand dead, and the cause of death is bycatch. For loggerheads, the fisheries causing mortality is mostly bottom set nets. I was wondering what the main cause of death for the loggerhead is in your area.
Well, in our strandings, we see either vessel strike or not an obvious cause of death, which we assume is drowning from being caught in something. And it depends on how decomposed it is, if we can do a necropsy and determine cause of death. I mean, bycatch is a huge problem for many species, and I know in the Mediterranean, it's a huge problem. We think in our local waters, it may be that they're getting caught more just in some other kind of net. We know some is net fisheries.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ingrid is asking for an estimate of how many leatherbacks are there.
Well, again, that Northwest Atlantic, the estimate of nesting females. So our population, 10 to 15,000 nesting females. There are probably more females than males, because something I couldn't get into, but sea turtles have the sex of a hatchling is determined by temperature in the nest. They don't have sex chromosomes. And so depending on where in the nest the egg is and the temperature of the beach, and as beaches are warming with climate change, we're seeing more females. The populations may already have been skewed somewhat, but now they're being skewed more as beaches are warmer. So there probably are fewer males. We don't really know how many, unfortunately. And there may be enough, but we don't really know what's too few males.
So Anna in her question had mentioned bycatch, and Ruth is asking what that is. What is bycatch? Bycatch
means gets caught accidentally in the fishery. Okay. So like off the mid-Atlantic states, so kind of Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, that area, there's a lot of long lining. And we know that leatherbacks get caught on long lines in that area. There is long lining in our waters too, farther offshore. We don't know how much of an issue it is really up here, but down there it's a big issue. Where it's seen so drastically is in the Eastern Pacific. The Eastern Pacific population of leatherbacks is the most endangered population, now not species, but population of sea turtles in the world. And in fact, many researchers feel they may not recover. And a lot of that is bycatch. Much of it is long lining. But you know, I'd sort of like to leave you, I mean, there's lots of doom and gloom, but we also know that there are success stories, as I mentioned, and the greens are a good example of that. That greens used to be listed as endangered, and then nesting numbers, due to lots of good, hard conservation work, nesting numbers are up for greens.
That's wonderful.
A lot. And so they have been downlisted, meaning they're still afforded federal protection, but they're now threatened instead of endangered. So, you know, that's a good thing, because if species on the endangered species lists never improved. If numbers never improved,
Right.
then opponents could say, well, why do it? It doesn't work. Well, you want it to work, and if it works, you want to show it works. So there are successes, and all of you probably are involved here because you're conservationists, and you know, good conservation work helps.
Right, pays off. Ruth is saying this was great. Thanks so much. Elizabeth says, thank you for sharing this most valuable information. I certainly will share with my boating friends. Great work. So that's having a good impact. Jackie says, great presentation, very informative. Thank you, Karen. And the last question I have is from Glenna that asks, what do they feed the turtles while they're in captivity?
Well, it's funny, we were just up at New England Aquarium. They offer some tours to our volunteers that we just did over the last week or so with just their remaining turtles there. And it's great for our volunteers because when we find these turtles on the beaches, the cold stuns, I mean, they look dead usually, and they're emaciated, they're dehydrated, so they're kind of shriveled and dark. And for our volunteers to see them healthy and robust and, you know, fat, not fat, but back to healthy weights is great. And they talk about feeding, and some of them are very picky. I mean, they try not to, they don't usually feed them right away. You know, they've got a whole protocol of intake, of raising temperature slowly. I mean, one of the things we train our volunteers is to not warm sea turtles beyond 55 air temp, because that can kill a cold stun. So anyway, as they get to New England Aquarium, they're warmed over a period of days. They don't usually start eating for several days at least. And then they start introducing, they're feeding them squid, herring, clams, just different seafood. And the greens are eating that too. Now the greens also get romaine lettuce. They're sort of eating everything.
Sounds like quite a good diet.
Yeah, but you know, they tell us, I mean, some of the loggerheads will not touch anything but one food. Why? I don't know.
Interesting. So that's it for questions, Karen. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And, you know, I encourage people to follow up and spread the information that you had suggested so that boaters are more aware and avoid striking these beautiful creatures. So thank you so much.
Thank you all.
So just before we finish up, I just wanted to share our contact information. Again, we're the Alliance to Protect Nantucket Sound. If you have any questions for me on our work or what we're doing to try to protect Nantucket Sound, you can contact me at audra@saveoursound.org. If you have any questions for Karen, you can contact me as well, and I will get those to her. You can follow us on social media and join our mailing list if you'd like to learn more about, you know, upcoming webinars. Again, you can register on our website, saveoursound.org/ACONS, which is a celebration of Nantucket Sound. And I'm excited to let you know that our next webinar for July will be July 28th at 6 p.m. again. And we are going to have a photographer and Cape Cod native, Stu Cooper Ryder, talking about photography and how he is inspired by Nantucket Sound and Cape Cod. So again, thank you for joining us tonight, and visit our website, get involved, and hope to see you next month. Bye-bye.